Welcome to the webinar, everybody. We'll start in a minute or so, give people a chance to join. Thank you. All right, we should probably get started. I don't know, Dr. Yu, did you want to kick it off here?
Thank you, Joe. Yes, I'll take it over. Robin, if I can have control of the slides.
Yeah, it's on for you. It should be working.
I can advance the slides for you, Fang, so we can get moving.
No, I don't even see the slides. That's the problem. Oh, I don't know why I don't see the slides. Robin.
That's a great question. Is it you don't see them on your screen at all?
Mm-mm.
Joe, are you seeing
Is
them?
there maybe a little button at the top, Fang, that says like view Robin's screen?
No.
Okay, why don't we do this, Robin? Can you get out of this, and would you mind just advancing slides and sharing your screen? Our apologies, everybody. I do see this and I can advance, but I don't.
Yeah, I can advance them. Fang, are you able to see them now?
I don't see them.
Yeah, maybe just share your screen and get out of this, sharing slides, Robin.
She is sharing her
Yeah.
screen, Joe.
Okay.
Should I log out and re-log in? Maybe it's a technical problem.
Yeah, why don't you do that? I'll just take us forward here. Okay, sorry about that, everybody. Well, welcome to our webinar here today, Tips for Developing and Submitting Proposals in Dementia Care Science. This is a collaborative webinar. It features Dr. Fang Yu, who directs the Arizona State University Roybal Center for Older Adults Living Alone with Cognitive Decline. And myself here at the University of Minnesota, I co-direct the EMBRACE Roybal Center, the Establishing Mechanisms of Benefit for Reinforcing the Alzheimer's Care Experience, AD/ADRD Roybal Center here at the University of Minnesota. I co-direct this Roybal Center with Dr. Andrea Gilmore-Bykowski at the University of Wisconsin. We'll also have with us from our center, Dr. Nancy Hodgson, who co-leads our Behavioral Intervention Development Core. Fang, can you see the slides?
Yes, I'm back.
Okay,
I apologize.
But
we actually logged in 20 minutes early. We made sure everything works. I don't know what happened.
That's the way it
go
is.
live.
So
Happy New Year to everyone. Thank you so much for being here. As you all know, in 2024, 14 Roybal Center were funded along with a coordinating center. So all Roybal centers put out calls for proposals to sponsor different research projects. And today, Dr. Gaugler and I, we're going to talk about some of the tips and pointers using those Roybal calls as an example to help you give you some tips and avoid some pitfalls in grant proposal development. So for ASU Roybal Center, our title is ASU Roybal Center for Older Adults Living Alone with Cognitive Decline. And our focus is really on technological enabled behavior and lifestyle interventions to delay Alzheimer's disease and improve quality of life. All Roybal centers must follow a few prescriptions in a way in the call. So I will talk about those. So the first one, let's look at the significance of our Roybal Center. Let's go to the next slide. Those are the 4 things I will talk. The first one is, why is it important to work with older adults who live alone? As a matter of fact, currently around 4.3 million older adults, 55 years and older, live alone with some levels of cognitive decline. And among people who have an established diagnosis of dementia, about 33% of them, almost a third, actually live alone by themselves. However, most of the intervention development and clinical trials were focusing on people living with others or have remote care providers. That include my own work in exercise. One of our requirements is to have a study partner to be with them. So as you can see here, this population have been neglected in clinical trials. Next slide, please. So if you look at your state across the nation, look at your state on this map here, you probably can see where your state falls regarding people who live alone with the beginning course of cognitive decline, which is subjective cognitive decline. So this level, as you can see here, some states are heavily affected with up to half of their older adults living alone, are living alone with some subjective cognitive decline. In Arizona, we are about 35%. So when you write grant proposals, of course, when you respond to our center for the call for trials, you're going to describe the importance to work with this population. However, that's only good enough for all proposal. That does not distinguish your own proposal. So if you plan to work with this population, you really have to identify a unique and significant problem that you are going to address with an intervention. And the most important piece is to emphasize the significance by criticizing the current state of science, describing related to your proposed problem and solution, what is currently known, what are the gaps, and how your proposed solution is going to advance the field to address that gaps and develop an intervention that's accessible and scalable. For example, by simply saying that the literature is mixed is not enough to support the significance. As we all know, the NIH review criteria are changing. Your impact score is going to be limited by the significance score, meaning that your impact score cannot be higher than the significance score. So this makes this analysis of the current evidence super important in your proposal development. Next slide. So the second piece I want to talk about is the NIH stage model. So there are a number of different models out there guiding behavioral intervention development and advancement. And part of the model came into existence was because a lot of the interventions that have been tested to be efficacious have not been successfully translated into real world to affect truly patient outcomes. So, and part of the reason is because this intervention development has been a black box. We don't really know how this intervention works, why it worked for some people, why it didn't work for other people. And those background gave rise to the development of the NIH stage model. So you can think of it as a way to help you conceptualize how your overall research is gonna progress over the long term. So the purpose of this model is truly to help develop a maximally potent and implementable behavioral interventions. Next slide. So the NIH stage model, most people know there are those 6 stages. Stage 0 is really understanding the mechanism to inform future intervention development. So it's basic science research. Stage 1 usually encompasses 2 phases. Stage 1A is intervention design, development, refinement, and stage 1B is you can think of it as a feasibility or pilot testing of the intervention. And then stage 2 is efficacy testing in the traditional sense, meaning the intervention is done in a tightly controlled environment by research staff. Well, stage 3 is really testing it out in the community by community interventionists instead of the research staff. And stage 4 is effective, and stage 5 is implementation and dissemination. However, there are several things, as you can see, those different arrows that are pointing about the stage model is it's not prescriptive, meaning it does not follow a linear progress that you go from stage 1 to stage 5 in a linear fashion. It can go from different stages to other stages as indicated by those solid arrows. And sometimes you can even also jump stages as indicated by those dashed arrows. So this model is super flexible. It's non-prescriptive. It helps you to think through how you're gonna do your research. Where do you want to go? For example, in my own research, I never done a traditional stage 2. I did a hybrid stage 2 plus 3 because I hope to accelerate the translation into clinical practice by combining those 2 stages. And there are other hybrid models. You can do effective implementation trials together instead of doing them separately. So that's the purpose of this. All Roybal Center funded trials are guided by the NIH stage model. So one of the important things in grant writing is we always talk about, okay, based on the findings of this research, we will be able to do this, this, and that. Of course, we all perceive this will be a positive research finding based on the research by using a very rigorous designed research protocol. But there is always this potential problem that your findings are null and not as expected. So as part of the grant writing process, you should really think about, okay, that's a potential problem. If that problem happens, what do I learn that could also be super valuable to advance research to the next stage? And that should be discussed as part of the potential problems. But commonly we only see the positive results where people will go, we don't see enough on what you will do if it doesn't go the way you want. But to be able to make the trial meaningful, if the results are null, it means in many ways you probably should be gathering data about certain aspects of your study to help you evaluate and better understand where the study failed. For example, 2 most important things in intervention trials is treatment fidelity and adherence. So how are you gonna define and measure treatment fidelity and adherence? Probably will generate a lot of meaningful data when your result is null, so you can better refine your intervention to guide the next stage of research. Next slide. The third major focus of all Roybal centers is the intervention has to be guided by mechanisms. For example, in traditional clinical trials, this is what we do. We design intervention, we test it on some well thought out outcomes and trying to demonstrate the efficacy. Next slide. But what's missing, But what's missing here is this mechanistic link between the interventions and outcomes. Many of the proposals we receive when we review them, they unfortunately very few have thoughtfully thought about the mechanism that the intervention is engaged in and how that's gonna affect the outcomes. So at the beginning of intervention design, it will be super helpful for you to think about those mechanisms. Let's talk about what those mechanisms could be. Next slide. So for ASU Roybal Center, we broadly define intervention mechanism in many ways. It could be behavioral, cognitive, social, physiological, pathological, or biological mechanisms. To make an intervention truly driven by mechanisms, your intervention should be engaging one of the mechanisms. For example, in my own work in exercise intervention for preventing and treating Alzheimer's disease, I really started off on the right side on the biological mechanisms. I focus on aerobic fitness. So when I designed the intervention, the aerobic exercise intervention, I had to make sure this intervention dose is going to be sufficient to affect aerobic fitness, to have the downstream effects on outcomes, whatever I want to measure. And that should all be very well supported by basic science research. Our center does not fund stage 0 studies because it's basic science work. So we are not users of basic science stage 1 evidence. So again, going back to my example, there are sufficient evidence in other populations that have shown if your aerobic exercise dose is sufficiently designed and delivered, then it should increase aerobic fitness. And aerobic fitness has been shown to be a mediator of cognitive changes. So there you can form this logical connection that if an aerobic exercise dose is sufficiently prescribed and delivered, it will improve aerobic fitness with the downstream effect on cognitive health. However, there is also this potential direct effect of just doing aerobic exercise itself, whether or not it affects aerobic fitness or not, may directly impact the outcomes. So next slide. So the next key component of ASU Roybal Center is the interventions has to be technologically enabled, because I don't think it's a hard explanation to say why this is important, because we have a growing population with cognitive impairment who are living alone, but we don't have enough human workforce to care for everyone as needed. So technology can help fill this void by facilitating intervention delivery and scale them to broader populations. So the technology intervention we talk about, Robin, next slide, could be anything you can think of. It could be telehealth, mobile health, AI-driven. Anything on this list will fall within the scope of our ASU Roybal Center. It could also be new things that we don't yet know here. However, there are several things you do need to consider when you design a technology-delivered interventions. Specifically, I want to focus on the treatment fidelity, adherence, and also the ethical principles that you should have clear consideration for. Treatment fidelity for human-delivered intervention is usually easier to measure and to evaluate. But when you put technology in place, you really have to think, okay, how is treatment fidelity assured by the technology, and how you're going to measure it in terms of the delivered dose. We are working on a number of different interventions. For example, one of our intervention was exergaming, meaning people are doing exercise when they are also engaged in cognitive activities. So we are working with the data scientists to backend configure algorithms, whether or not we can capture the dose that delivered. So right now, the simple thing you can think, the clicks or the levels they were able to reach during the game. But are those enough to measure the dose actually delivered? Probably not. So we are looking at other mechanisms to help better understand the dose and capture them. The last piece regarding ethical principles related to technological interventions, you do have to think about trust. Will your potential participant trust the technology? So that typically will require a user-engaged or user-centered approach in the intervention development. So you can get shareholder input as you build the technology to make sure this is applicable, they like it, they actually gonna use it. Because no matter how beautifully designed your intervention is, if people don't use it, it means nothing. And sometimes as scientists, we design in certain ways for different reasons, maybe better capture treatment fidelity and adherence, but those might not be well received by the end users. So engaging them from the beginning in the technology development is super, super important. All right, now we can go to the next slide, Robin. So ASU Roybal Center's conceptual framework is also couched within the health disparity research framework. But we are not saying you need to measure everything here on the slide, but we want you to think broadly, what will be the most important level factor for you to measure and how you should measure it. One piece about technology-enabled intervention is it's often the case when people design it, they have limited representation of the population, and subsequently they have to do cultural, social adaptations, which actually adds a lot of time to intervention development pipeline. So maybe it's more meaningful to engage a diverse representative population of a shareholder group from the beginning, so that cultural justification or adaptation could take less time for intervention development pipeline. Environmental factors, again, it depends on your research question, what you're interested in. It may be an important aspect of your study, or it may play a lesser role. But for our center, we are super flexible regarding where you want to land in terms of the health disparity research framework. But biological sex and gender education are typically the key things you do have to collect regardless your research focus. Next one. So now put everything together into our ASU Roybal Center's conceptual framework. You can see here we are technology-driven, MOBC-driven interventions. That could be anything could be a hybrid human technology or mainly human delivered, but assisted by technology, or it could be purely technology delivered interventions. And then it has to focus on mechanism of behavior change or mechanistic target. It could be anything from cognitive, social to biological, pathological. The end goal or the immediate goal is really to affect behavior and lifestyle change to help people to be more adopting more healthy lifestyle behaviors, with the proximate outcomes on clinical, cognitive, functional, psychological well-being, quality of life, with the long-term goal to delay the onset and progression of Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, hopefully delay nursing home, long-term care service use, and maintain people aging in place for as long as possible. And all this work is couched within the NIH stage model and the health disparities conceptual framework. Next slide. So all Roybal centers have now gone through 3 funding cycles. The first 2 trials came with the funding of the Roybal centers. We all have 2 calls already. So the last call, maybe for some other centers, it will be second to the last, but for ASU Roybal Center, this will be the last call because we support trials for 2 years. So we're gonna fund most likely 4 trials, and please don't hold me accountable for the dollar amount here because that's probably gonna change depending on what we eventually get from NIH and what's doable. But our goal is to fund 4 clinical trials. Most of the trials submitted to our center are stage 1 trials. So far we only had a couple of efficacy trials. However, we didn't really fund them because we feel early stage intervention development work is needed. So if you are planning to submit to our center, another key thing you should consider, even for stage 1B, a feasibility or pilot study, you still need to be powered. You can consider to be powered pre and post if you're gonna do, regardless if you're doing 1 single group design or 2 group design, because you most likely will not have any power for between group comparisons. But unfortunately, all Roybal Center studies are required to be powered in one way or the other. So that will be one way to power it, pre and post. And a second pointer, is you may want to consider to power on your mechanistic indicators. All right, if your intervention is truly designed based on a mechanism, then the intervention should be able to affect that mechanistic indicator before they can impact clinical outcomes, because that probably takes longer or a larger dose of the intervention to affect. So think carefully what your mechanistic indicator could be and potentially power on that. Another pointer is many of the trial investigators or applicants to our center were having trouble grappling with mechanism indicators because that hasn't been part of their education or training, and they were having trouble conceptualizing what that could be. So a pointer will be to think about some behavior change theory and to look at the mediators and the mechanism proposed via that theory. So you have a better foundation. And of course, you can always analyze the literature to see what do we know about this type of interventions and why do we think it may work. And my exercise trial is the mechanism is done through an in-depth literature review. So that will help inform you. One key pitfall you want to avoid is just put mechanistic indicator. Like a lot of people put in self-regulation as the mechanism, but we don't really see how your intervention will affect self-regulation. Another pointer is regarding multi-component interventions. If you're gonna do multi-component interventions, it will be ideal that each component works through a different mechanism. Because if they all work through the same mechanism, are your intervention component redundant? Why would you need so many interventions to affect the same mechanism? All right, my time is up, so I'm gonna stop here and I'll come back to answer any questions later. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Yu. Thank you again for so many of you attending here today. Similar to Fang, I'm going to begin with just a really, really brief overview of the EMBRACE Roybal Center. And then more importantly, and I believe probably the principal reason you're here, is talk about what our experiences have been in reviewing and selecting trials for Roybal funding, similar to Dr. Yu, and perhaps even more broadly, trying to extract some of these more specific recommendations to mechanistic testing of dementia care interventions and development, and think about it more broadly in terms of overall grant writing, grant development, and how it could enhance our dementia care science. And again, I want to be clear, there are many, many incredible resources out there on grant writing and how to write great grants and such. I don't think we had planned or aimed to replicate that. We certainly can direct you to some of those great resources, including some really great books that I have used in the past, and you may find it helpful as well. But again, we're going to start from the EMBRACE and this mechanistic Roybal perspective, and then perhaps moving from there to a more broader set of recommendations. And again, I want to acknowledge my colleague, Dr. Nancy Hodgson, who co-leads our Behavioral Intervention Development course. She'll be available to answer questions at the end as well. I unfortunately have to leave at 1:45. This is the EMBRACE team. You heard me mention Dr. Hodgson as well as Dr. Gilmore-Bykowski earlier as part of the EMBRACE leadership team. As well, Dr. Laura Gitlin is the co-lead of the Behavioral Intervention Development Core. We also have a wonderful group of who we call EMBRACE mentors. These are experts in the space of dementia care science and methods, as well as a really strong external advisory committee that provides us excellent oversight in terms of progress, in terms of achievement of our aims, and as well as hopefully accomplishing our overall objectives as a center. What we do here is really based in these three areas of support. We support investigators specifically who test mechanistically driven dementia care interventions across the stage model. We do that in many different ways. Our goal is to ultimately advance the science on how do we better understand mechanisms of action underlying successful dementia care interventions, or perhaps even unsuccessful ones. Can we get a better sense of the why something works in addition to whether something works? Kind of, you saw that really, I think, interesting slide Fang presented earlier where you have intervention, arrow to outcomes. That's whether an intervention works. But do we know why it works? What are the processes that or mechanisms that lead to that outcome? and how does the intervention influence that? That's really, I think, the space that these Roybal centers are in, and the ways they're trying to advance the science of dementia care interventions. Finally, we do a lot of engagement, such as webinars like these, as well as a collection of other resources, which if we have time, we'll talk about briefly, to really foster a scholarly community that's engaged in this type of science. So talking about some of our resources, we've already have put on some really excellent webinars. Some of you may have attended these. They really start to get at key elements of a mechanistic understanding of dementia care interventions and how to conduct that science. And I think it has a lot of relevance to how we propose grants to do that. For example, we had Dr. Jeffrey Burke, who developed what's called the Climber tool, which is really a checklist to guide how we investigate mechanisms in behavior change, or really dementia care intervention work, and what are the elements we should keep in mind when proposing studies to do exactly that. And then on top of that, we had a couple of methodologically and methods-oriented webinars that focused on how to test mechanisms specifically. And then a really interesting one by Dr. Allure and Dr. Tong from Yale University that was really addressing the issue of dose. How do we know about what is the right dose, and how do we address heterogeneity when examining the effects of interventions? And this has a lot of relevance as well to not only understanding the effects of interventions and outcomes, but also the effects of interventions on mechanisms. Again, these are great resources. They're all recorded. The slides are available on our website. And if you use that QR code, you can get to our website directly. As well as the website link here, embraceroybal.wisc.edu. You know, in addition to guidance of who we are and the trials that we funded, which I think are really helpful to review to get a better sense of the type of work we're supporting, and how to apply for support, is we also highlight key events and resources that we've been compiling that I think you really are a great starting point to trying to, number one, understand what is a mechanism, which seems simple at first, but as you heard Dr. Yu mention, is actually fairly complicated. Many of us have not been trained in understanding or adopting a mechanistic perspective when we design and develop interventions. And we try to compile a number of resources. These include articles, chapters, additional webinars, and other recorded resources that can really help give you some grounding in a mechanistic perspective, and then more broadly, key resources to dementia care intervention development related to, for example, fidelity assessment or other types of key concerns and issues. They're all available on our resources page. So what the EMBRACE Center does, tests mechanism of actions that target multiple levels of influence in dementia care. I think one thing we do understand in dementia care is in order to care optimally for someone living with dementia, it often requires intervening at multiple levels of influence, not just at the individual level, not just at the care partner level, but often addressing additional layers, sometimes simultaneously, to really help improve care and improve well-being on the part of the person living with dementia, care partners, and et cetera. So we take and adopt this sociological approach as kind of the underlying conceptualization of our center. We're also very interested in tailored interventions that are personalized according to the needs of the care partner, the person living with dementia, perhaps other levels of influence, and interventions that are done broadly defined in home and community settings. And you see here, this is more or less reiterating what I just mentioned. So considering some of the trials we've started supporting now, and just like Dr. Yu said, we are in the process of selecting likely 2 additional trials to support. We're supporting Dr. Monica Kimbang and Dr. Elizabeth Voss trials, both of which are adopting mechanistic perspectives to test very interesting interventions, in both cases adapted to their particular settings and questions. This is just a quick overview of our trial selection process, probably not a whole lot different than Dr. Yu had mentioned. We always start with letters of intent. We offer then a consultation for people who submit letters of intent if they're interested, to help give them a sense. Are you on the right track? Do you need to kind of refine what you're doing or your focus to ensure that you're adhering to the foci of the EMBRACE Roybal Center? In some instances, we might refer letter of intent submitters to other Roybal centers that might be more appropriate. But in any event, we try to have that consultation so we can kind of put people on the right track. After we select letters of intent to proceed to the full application process, we then have additional consultations that often include not just the applicant in this case, but we also ask the applicant to bring in a biostatistician or others so we can really discuss what's the plan, what are your aims, what are some other areas you may want to shore up or address prior to submitting as strong an application as possible. We then conduct a very rigorous NIH-style review process that leads to trial selection. All right, so that's the quick overview of the Roybal piece. Now I want to open it up, and I think we have Dr. Hodgson here. She can weigh in. Fang, if you wanted to weigh in, I think this is going to be a great time for questions as well. But here are some tips that we found. Number one, when reviewing applications to the Roybal Center, our EMBRACE Roybal Center, but I also want you to take a step back and think more broadly about how this could better enhance our grant writing for dementia care more broadly, because many of us aren't necessarily doing or identifying mechanisms to test in our intervention work for whatever reasons. We may be at different stages of the stage model. We have different purposes. Nonetheless, I still think some of these tips are helpful to think about when addressing grants in the space of dementia care. First is the mechanistic approach in and of itself. Number one, do you feel confident in identifying a mechanism? Often, as Dr. Yu had mentioned, is it theoretically derived? Is there some other reason for why you're specifying this mechanism as this is the reason why the intervention works? If you can identify it too, can you measure it? So are there good measures of the mechanism? Increasingly in the work we're doing, we have to do more than have a psychometrically sound measure. We may need measures ideally that have established minimally clinically important differences if possible. Again, that's hard to do and find in our space, but if you can do that, or at least make the case that this mechanism is important and showing this amount of change of this mechanism is important because of X, that is critical. And I think a lot of grant reviewers are looking for that right now. And then finally, you've identified it, you measured it, can you target it effectively? Meaning, is it sensitive to change? And is there a strong theoretical reasoning rationale or some other rationale as to why this intervention should be influencing this said mechanism? It's easier said than done, I know that. But it's really trying to take a stronger, more rigorous conceptual approach when developing and testing interventions, and then eventually moving on to the later stages of the stage model. As I had mentioned, aligning the intervention effectively with the mechanism is really important. And sometimes that's not always done. Sometimes an applicant may specify an intervention and then the mechanism of action that's identified might make sense in linking to the outcome, the ultimate outcome specified, but the case of why this intervention should influence this mechanism isn't made. And worse, sometimes multiple mechanisms are specified, and it's almost like we're just picking things and we hope the intervention, they won't say this in writing it up, obviously, but it appears that multiple mechanisms with the hope of, well, the intervention hopefully is going to influence one, and that's going to influence the outcome. It's probably not the best approach. I think having a stronger a priori, theoretically driven approach is really critical. And that will then lead to a mechanism offering a much more compelling causal explanation rather than not having a really strong conceptual or theoretical grounding to your intervention and why it works. Okay. Here's an example of aims from Dr. Elizabeth Beth Foth from Utah State, which I think does a really good job of taking this mechanistic approach. So she is determining the efficacy of an evidence-based intervention, ECT. And what she's doing is adapting it, has adapted it, and is going to determine whether it is efficacious in the dementia care context. And this program focuses on dementia care's mental, physical, and relational well-being. She hypothesized that, again, traditionally for those that are in the treatment group who receive ACT versus those in the wait list, will show improvements in mental, physical, and relational well-being over time. Okay, this is an aim we would probably be familiar with. It's a classic aim. Intervention will impact outcome or set of outcomes. Fine. But Beth went a step farther to take a mechanistic approach. So she used that climber tool that I mentioned earlier that was presented in the webinar by Jeffrey Burke. And first, what she did was wanted to determine, does the intervention influence caregiver psychological distress? Okay, So that is the first pathway that she was hoping to identify. And then moving to aim 2, she wanted to understand how ACT-related skills work as mechanisms of change in improving mental, physical, and relational well-being. She hypothesized that ecological momentary assessment data of individuals' psychological flexibility, and this is the mechanism, explains changes in mental, physical, and relational well-being. So first, she was testing the effects of the intervention on the outcome, well-being, ACT on well-being. 2, now she's proposing to ascertain whether ACT influences this mechanism of psychological flexibility, which is a theoretically identified mechanism in the ACT intervention. Okay. And in additionally, and we thought this was a really nice feature, she's incorporating qualitative data as well to look at some of the use characteristics of ACT skills that are offered by this particular intervention. Okay. And this is the final aim that actually does a better job of mapping on that testing of mechanism vis-a-vis climber. So, okay. Finally, this was her letter of intent aim. So she had this exploratory aim, and then she tightened it up to determine if how user adherence to the program at time 2 is associated with the proposed mechanism against psychological flexibility at time 3. Okay. Greater psychological flexibility will make improvements in distress. So that gives you a sense of how Beth Foth actually went a step beyond the traditional aims of efficacy to starting to really get a sense experimentally how this ACT intervention for the dementia care context influences a key mechanism of flexibility. And further, how does that pathway of ACT to psychological flexibility lead to well-being as an outcome? Okay, so again, here are just some general components that we found. And again, I'm going to turn to Fang and Nancy soon to address some of the other questions that might be coming from the audience. This is advice that goes for anything. And certainly it applies to the Roybal Centers and the specific Roybal Centers, because as you saw, each of the Roybal Centers does have a different theme. Does your proposal fit EMBRACE or Fang's center at Arizona State or any of the others? And oftentimes they don't. There hasn't been a sense or effort in actually looking and understanding what does EMBRACE support as trials, and does my trial really fit that in terms of outcome, in terms of level of influence, in terms of home and community-based focus. You'd be surprised how many applicants don't necessarily adhere to some of those foci. The issue of concept counting. Consider how many concepts you're introducing and are they the same? This is very important when you're considering mechanisms and identification of mechanisms, is ensuring that the mechanism itself doesn't have a tautological or conceptual overlap with your outcome, that they are indeed 2 distinct concepts. Obviously, the mechanism influences the outcome and making the case as to why that is, but ensuring that these concepts don't have too much overlap. This is a really, really great tip that, in fact, I think applies to any grant we write. Anything in AIM should be mentioned in the first paragraph. And why this is important is this: you do not want a reviewer to try to get a sense at what are you doing, why is it important until the halfway point or later of your AIMS page. It should all be encapsulated in that first paragraph. That often takes multiple drafts to do that, but it helps ground the reviewer in understanding, okay, this is what this proposal is about. This is why it's important. You heard Fang talk about significance and impact. This is why it's potentially significant and impactful, and this is the objective and goal that this applicant is going to take. Summing that up in the first paragraph is really important. This next piece is really essential as well. It can be really, really hard when you don't have a lot of space, which is describing your intervention. Who does your intervention target? What are its components? Can you clearly define its components? And then of course, who does what, how often, and why? There are many tools out there that can help disentangle reporting of interventions that then can be synthesized in a concise way in interventions. One thing that comes to mind is Dr. Laura Gitlin and Sarah Saja in one of their intervention textbooks that came out in 2016. It's on our Roybal website. They have what's called an intervention map. Now, this isn't the same as intervention mapping. That's a whole different method. But it's an intervention map that really forces a researcher to identify the elements of the intervention. What are those elements thought to influence in terms of outcomes, and what are the theoretical drivers of those associations? It's a really nice tool. Another great tool is called ITACS from Richard Schultz. This came out back in 2010. It's a really nice tabular approach to breaking down and reporting the different elements of your intervention. And Robin and Katie, if you can put in the link, not only the resources page, but maybe links to Dr. Gitlin and Dr. Sajja's books, that might be helpful too. I'll send along the ITACS reference as well once I can get to chat here. Show your expertise in terms of prior trials with similar techniques, clinical experience, et cetera. That's always important. I think that's really important to demonstrate in any application. And in particular, if you're working with a team, showing and demonstrating how your team has collaborated together. Do you have a record of collaboration? And if you don't have a record of collaboration, how can you ensure that the reviewers that this is not just a marriage of convenience between investigators, but how can you assure reviewers that in fact this is feasible, that this partnership will work to allow you to achieve what are often complicated aims when you're talking about interventions. Again, and this is a key point, we all probably realize this, again, easier said than done, is sharpening by revision, not just wordsmithing, is really reading and reviewing grants critically. It gets harder and harder as you have to revise more and more, but this is why it's important not only to have a strong team of colleagues that can read your work critically, but then to avail yourself of other resources if you have them, of internal or robust external review from colleagues, sometimes even outside of your area of expertise, to really help ensure that what you're writing makes sense, is readable, and that all reviewers will understand it. Because I can tell you, as someone who's reviewed a lot of grants, and perhaps many of you in the audience have as well, it is very easy to lose reviewers quickly. And when that happens, it's almost impossible to get them back to ensure a good score on a grant proposal. Okay. I always think it's important to couch your intervention or your grant proposal in a larger body of work. Where does this go? Where is this work going? In the case of an intervention, dementia care intervention, just like we say here, how is this going to influence progression to subsequent stages of the NIH stage model? Okay. And again, we understand it's a circular process, not always stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3, et cetera. You may go backwards or may have to refine, but nonetheless, give your reviewers an idea that you're couching this within the context of something larger, a larger program of research, a larger strategy to ensure that this intervention not only is efficacious, but hopefully will be effective, will have dissemination and implementation potential. And if you can actually understand that and begin to understand that, even in the context of, say, a stage 1 trial, I think the better off you are in making the case that this intervention will have eventual compelling impact, public health impact. Okay. Again, we have all these different resources available that I think are important to consider. Always involve your statistician, and then consider a grant peer reviewer work group. So, all right, I'm going to turn it over to Fang and Dr. Hodgson here. Robin, Katie, if you can help progress slides, I'm sure there'll be many thoughts. Everyone, if you have questions, any questions, any ideas, thoughts you want to share in the chat, please do so. Again, we're really grateful that you attended today. I'm grateful, and thank you, Dr. Yu and Dr. Hodgson, as well as Robin and Katie for taking it all the way home here. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Joe. Robin, maybe we can start with Q&A.
Yes, yeah. I wanted to mention too, before we jump into that, with the aims that Joe was showing, there are like 3 things that I was thinking of when he was showing them, I wanted to mention to everyone. One, the difference between the LOI aim and the final aims. There were a few things to highlight. One is that Dr. Foth had reduced her mechanisms from the LOI. She had 3 mechanisms, and we reduced it to 1 based on the literature because we thought that was really important. So she incorporated that. She also specified that she utilized this climber, but she also specified it in the aims. So you could see that with that final aim versus the LOI stage, there wasn't that. So that was really important. We'd like to see that as well. And I think too, something else just to mention in general is that we always like to see at least for EMBRACE, we like to see that first aim be an aim that is about the mechanisms. A lot of times we would get aims that are related to what you're doing, but they weren't necessarily about the mechanism. And the first aim, we really wanted to see it be mechanism focused. So just wanted to add those few things. Now to get to the questions. All right. Actually, we don't have any questions yet. So if you guys want to
Yeah,
put
they are. They're posted in the Q&A.
Oh, I'm
So
sorry.
the
Wrong
first
spot.
question from Anthony is about going over the timeline for submission.
Yes.
So
Okay.
we have we can post the timeline for submission. We're just closing out the second year our year for that. And we'll be launching the next year for letters of intent. I don't know if we can direct them to the Northwell site for the main dates for LOIs.
We can definitely do that. This year's round has just closed, but we'll get you they probably don't have it posted yet for
Yeah,
for
but you
next year.
can show
but-
this year's timeline, so
Mhm.
probably will be around the same time.
We'll grab that and put that address in the
Yeah.
chat.
Katie's
so-
on
Letters
it.
of letters of intent for this year we're due in October. So you can kind of anticipate around then, but if you join our mailing list, we'll give you tons of heads up when that is coming for next year.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And we anticipate our grant years start in June. So starting in October, we begin reviewing letters of intent and going through that consultation process that they mentioned. And then we review applications over the winter. We invite a select group to apply and complete a full application. And then the awards hopefully go out by June 1st.
Lawrence was asking about whether or not EMBRACE funds studies in Africa. And while we don't fund necessarily international investigators, it's a little complicated with NIH funding. We have funded investigators who have we have invited investigators who have collaborations in the US. It's probably something Lawrence, we'd have to follow up with you individually about specifically um, your question. So we'll tackle that. And then Elizabeth Phelan has a great question about seminal articles about mechanisms that we'd recommend. And again, I think one of the points, there was a lot of pearls of wisdom that I was hearing on today's call, and there are a lot of resources out there. So we can direct you to some articles on our website about mechanisms, and there are some really great ones. And particularly, we've directed people to the science of behavior change as a general resource for mechanisms of behavior change, and that's particularly what any of the Roybal centers are focused on as a starting point. But I think that Fang also mentioned, you want to start in the literature around your particular intervention and what mechanisms have been associated with that. What particular mechanisms precede the change in outcome that's associated with your intervention, and what are the potential mechanisms there. So it really is specific to the type of intervention, conceptually, theoretically, drawn from the literature, that you can hypothesize. So um, those would be the avenues I would suggest you pursue. Let's see. So then Dr. Scoblo asked for specific advice for early investigators who may have less prior work to demonstrate their expertise and ability. And this is again, and these are invitations for investigators at the pilot stage or earlier stage in their career. There are many training opportunities available. So I think being part of a collaborative like this and attending these opportunities, these webinars, are ways of growing your expertise. If you join our email list, we do send training opportunities out there to develop your skills. If you're talking about articulating your work uh, within your narrative, it's uh, I, I guess I'd want to hear a little bit more about what type of expertise you have and how you're thinking about working to articulate that. And I don't know, Fang, if you have a helpful answer for Dr. Scoblo.
Yeah, I just want to add that we don't really require you to be a senior investigator. We sponsor early stage very much so.
Yeah.
So no preliminary data is fine. If your perceived proposal is significant, is scientifically rigorous, you have a great chance to be funded, regardless your status.
Yeah. I think Dr. Dr. Gaugler was talking about, showing some evidence of work in the intervention space, or perhaps showing your collaborative relationships with your team members. And I think that's helpful, but we recognize too that you're early stage. An anonymous attendee is asking whether or not non-technology interventions would be considered at ASU Roybal.
No, you have to have some technology component.
Okay. Dr. Phelan is asking, how could you describe how mediators differ from mechanism, or is the concept of mechanism a modernized way of referring to mediators? I think mechanisms can act differently, right? They can serve to mediate or moderate the relationship, but we typically think of a mechanism as a mediator, that it's directly the reason why the behavior change is occurring. So I think it is a way of thinking about that. It's the active ingredients of your intervention. And that's where the state of science is right now. We have many interventions that we really are unclear as to why they're resulting in the outcomes. And it's important for us to really understand that. And so we really do need to use the statistical approaches to help us understand why that is the case. So mediation testing is one way to get at that answer. I don't know if it's a modernized way of talking about it. It's just a rigorous approach to mathematically distilling if a relationship exists or not. So or not. And so, that's what one approach for us as scientists to understand where the active ingredients are within an intervention. And until we can answer those questions, we really can't advance behavioral science in this very important area. So that is the spirit behind all of the Roybals that we're talking about right now, and a very important reason why we're all working very hard in this space right now. Dr. Fong, do you have anything to add there?
Thank you. You answered it really, really well. I just want a little snippet that in the past, many mediation or analysis were performed without a theoretical foundation or a mechanistic support. And so to me, a mechanism is a mediator, but it's based on stage 0 research that supported to be a mediator. It's not coming out of thin air.
Yeah, Ted, thank you for the answer you posted on the Q&A as a way to help us understand it, perhaps. Dr. Petrovsky posed, it seems that there's a need to conduct systematic or scoping reviews on the mechanisms of specific interventions. There absolutely is a need in the literature for more literature reviews. If you try to conduct literature reviews on mechanisms of action in dementia caregiving interventions, you will find scant literature. And we're creating an Airtable right now just to try to get a sense of this literature, so that we can create some guidance documents for our EMBRACE Center. And ways or frameworks to identify relevant literature. I think, what we're finding is that there's a lot of discussion of potential mechanisms in the discussion section of these intervention papers. But there's not a lot of specific testing of mechanisms in these intervention papers. So what we're doing is reviewing intervention studies and going to the discussion sections to see what the investigators are positing as the potential or, perhaps what they're positing as the possible or likely mechanism. But that's about as far as we're finding at the moment. Very few studies actually testing mechanisms.
And I want to recommend the resources from the Science of Behavior Change.
Mm.
They postulated at least 3 broad categories of behavior change mechanisms. So if you're unfamiliar with the work, you can start there just to get a sense of how this has been done in behavioral interventions.
Yes, multiple PIs are allowed, and you are not required to involve senior investigators, but it would help strengthen your study team, especially if it's a new area for you or you're early to intervention science. And if you bring in a senior investigator who has expertise to help you in intervention science, that is likely to strengthen uh, your ability to conduct that trial.
I also want to add for early investigators, think about this is more also along the way of being a mentored project because you're gonna get mentorship from the Roybal Center that's fund your work. And you will probably want to get mentorship from your co-investigators who are senior to help you build this research.
We are at noon, so I don't know if there's a final question you want to take or if it's a good place to wrap up, but just letting you know.
I think we can wrap up.
Excellent.
Sounds
Thank you
good.
so much, everyone, for joining. This was really great.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
take
you,
care.
Kate and Robin, for the wonderful organizing work. And it's good to see you, Nancy.
Yes, you too. Wonderful to see you.
All right. Hope to connect with you at the next conference.
Yes, yes, for sure. I'll see you in the spring. Yes.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.